Okay, so hello again, and once again, let me take the opportunity to thank you all for being here. It's been excellent to have all this community together, and we had very fruitful discussions. And we, on behalf of the organizing committee, are enjoying it, although a bit stressful, but we are really enjoying these fruitful discussions. So let me now go to the main topic, to this study. This study is a result of collaboration between Filippos Tzortzoglou, Anna Gardeli, Alivisos, Sofos, and myself. We all come from the University of the Aegean. There's an interesting story behind this collaboration, but we're from different departments, which allowed us to look at this topic both from the perspective of education and also design and technology. So, to start, mobile augmented reality has grown tremendously in the past decade. And learners now, as you know, they carry smartphones or tablets, maybe tablets not so much, but they carry smartphones everywhere. So mobile augmented reality is accessible and relatively cheap, low cost to deploy compared to specialized headsets, like, for example, mixed reality or VR headsets and so on. But the challenge is not just putting content on the screen. It's how learners actually interact with it. Do they simply tap buttons? Do they rotate 3D models? Or do they move around and manipulate physical objects? Each choice has consequences. So, for example, a 7-year-old primary school pupil might find complex 3D gestures quite confusing, while a university engineering student might actually need those gestures to practice spatial reasoning. Surprisingly, while there are many reviews on AR in education, very few focus on these issues of interaction design. So this is the gap that we wanted to fill. So to do this, we set out 5 research questions. First, what tracking methods and input modalities are most common? Second, how do input types relate to the physical scale of the experiment, and how strongly digital content is tied to the real world? This is the so-called coupling. Third, what kinds of tasks and content delivery strategies are typically supported? Fourth, how do design choices vary across age groups and subject areas? And finally, are there correlations between learners' age and the complexity of input used? So, in simple terms, who interacts, how do they interact, and under what conditions? So, to answer these questions, we conducted a systematic literature review following the PRISMA guidelines. We searched Scopus, and we screened 868 papers. And after applying inclusion and exclusion criteria, you can see the criteria in this image, we ended up with 62 relevant studies published between 2015 and 2025. So we just looked at 10 years studies. Now, each paper was coded along several dimensions. So it was subject domain, it was age group, spatial scope, tracking, input modality, type of task, and so on. So this allowed us to see not just individual findings, but also patterns across the field. And this is the second page of the papers and the coding in the various dimensions. Of course, you can find all the details in our actual paper. And today I hear that it's also published online, all the papers of the conference. So we're really happy about it. So regarding our research questions, when we looked at tracking mechanisms, the picture was clear. Whether we like it or not, most apps still rely on marker-based tracking. Okay, so 43 out of 62 used it. Think of pointing your camera at a printed card and the 3D model of a molecule or a planet pops up. It is reliable, but learners are tied to the marker. Okay, so if it goes out of view, the whole experience collapses. A small number used plane-based tracking. It was only 9 apps where the device, it recognizes a flat surface. It could be a table, for example. So, for example, a history app might place a 3D reconstruction of a monument on your desk. 5 apps used feature-based tracking, which can recognize, it creates a point cloud. It can recognize objects or spaces by their visual features. And 6 were location-based, where digital content appears at specific GPS coordinates, like cultural heritage tours, where a building is augmented with extra information when you pass by it. So even though technology has advanced, marker-based tracking still dominates the educational apps, probably because it's simple, and also it works on all devices. In terms of interaction, besides the typical interaction, of course, of AR is moving the phone around to see the content from different viewpoints. But the modalities that we find besides that are the following. The most popular was 2D touch, which was found in 32 apps. So learners tap buttons, they drag sliders, or enter text with their fingers. And it's simple and familiar, like using any other app. So you don't need any extra knowledge or extra training to do that. 16 apps had 3D spatial input, which allows students or general users to interact directly with 3D elements. They may move, rotate, or scale a 3D object using tap and drag gestures. Probably useful for STEM education, but not always easy for beginners. So we need to clarify this. The difference between 2D touch and 3D spatial input lies on the metaphor used. I mean, in both cases, the students use their fingers. But in the first case, they interact with 2D elements, with GUI elements, while in the second case, they interact with the 3D content that is displayed on the mobile phone's screen. So it's the same input in terms of using my fingers, but it's a different metaphor. It's a different way of thinking about the interaction. Tangible input, we have 11 apps, which means that learners manipulate physical objects. For instance, moving pieces like small cubes, for example, on a table in order to arrange virtual objects and characters on a map. Now, this feels natural, but it can be tiring also because consider you need to hold your phone or your tablet on one hand and manipulate the elements on the other hand. So this might be a bit tiring. Then 6 apps use marker scanning, where you have to scan different markers to reveal new content, like, for example, scanning flashcards and see models of an animal, of different animals. Locomotion, 6 apps that you need to walk around and your position is captured. And for example, pupils may move in a schoolyard to find and collect augmented clues in some gamified environment. So this is based on locomotion input. And finally, we found also 2 apps with more specific device-based inputs. For example, one of these, you needed to shake the device to trigger some extra animation. So overall, we see a dominance of touch, but we've created alternatives in certain contexts. Regarding user tasks and delivery, most apps are tabletop experiences. So all the experience takes place on a table. Think of students seated or moving a tablet over a desk, which is practical in classrooms, but doesn't fully exploit, of course, AR's potential. A few of them were room size. Imagine, for example, having a large 3D solar system projected appearing inside the classroom. And 9 were wall-sized, typically outdoors, like AR treasure hunts in historical sites. Another important dimension is the coupling, meaning how does the digital content relate to the physical space? So we have weakly coupled apps where the physical world doesn't add much meaning. So the marker or the projection plane are just placeholders. So there's no connection between the virtual content and the physical space. In moderately coupled ones, the marker object gives some semantic clue, like a picture of a skeleton triggering anatomy content. And finally, strongly coupled experience tie content tightly to the real world. For example, an app where students point at a real tree and can see its inner biology. Or like in this picture, a digitally reconstructed building is presented in its former location. So there's a connection between the digital content and the physical space. So we found some clear patterns. Touch is more common in tabletop setups. Locomotion is found, as expected, in wall-sized outdoor apps. And tangible input often goes with strong coupling. Now, regarding variation across age, what do students actually do in those apps? We found 4 main types of tasks. First of all, interface interaction. So they interact with digital elements like menus or buttons to perform some tasks, like solve quizzes or control the content. And this was the most common. Then 3D manipulation. They move, rotate, or scale the content, for example, a heart, a molecule, or a building. Then content insertion. They insert their own content, like, for example, cutting an anatomy model or adding shapes in a geometry exercise. Then media activation, trigger additional media, such as images, videos, or narrations that explain the content. And this is often found in cultural heritage apps. Finally, on top of this, we saw 5 content delivery strategies. So how was the educational content actually delivered? The categories are: first, exploratory visualization, for example, exploring the solar system. Then interactive simulation, like changing parameters in a physics experiment. Then challenge-based learning, like quizzes or step-by-step problem solving. gamification, like treasure hunts or reward systems, and contextual annotation, like extra layers of information linked to real objects like museum exhibits. So most of the apps, they combined more than one strategies, showing that mobile augmented reality can be both exploratory and instructional. When we look across age groups, only one app was for preschool, 19 were for primary school, 10 for secondary, 31 for university, and 4 for adults. And the subjects also varied. The science led the way with 20 apps, then engineering and technology with 15, humanities with 12, medicine with 8 apps, and math with 6. And we again saw some patterns that emerged in STEM and medicine. Tangible and spatial inputs are common because you need to manipulate some complex structures. In primary education, touch and simple marker scanning dominate because they are easy and intuitive. And in cultural heritage or environmental education, location-based AR and annotations are common, which link also to real spaces. We also see a clear connection between learner age and interaction complexity. We notice that the younger children, they use simple UIs like buttons and quizzes, keeping the cognitive load low. Secondary students had a bit more, like annotations and contextual features. University students engaged with 3D manipulation, multimodal inputs, and tangible setups. And in special education, we have only a few examples, but there was minimal touch interfaces to reduce barriers. This suggests that the input modalities must scale with age and ability rather than being one size fits all. Now, let me summarize some key takeaways. First of all, marker-based tracking is everywhere, but it restricts mobility. Imagine exploring a building reconstruction. It's hard if you have to keep your marker in view. Tangible input, it feels natural, like handling objects, but juggling a device on one hand and a physical object on the other can get uncomfortable in long sessions. Tabletop setups are convenient, but they underuse AR's potential. They turn the tablet into the so-called magnifying glass metaphor. So you look at 3D models around, but it has nothing to do, the model has nothing to do with the actual environment. So this is good, but it doesn't fully connect the digital and the physical worlds. And overall, age, subject, and context shape interaction design. So for example, a chemistry simulation for students has very different demands than a math quiz for young children. Based on these findings, we suggest, first of all, to align the input modality with a learner's abilities and context. So don't give complex 3D manipulation to preschoolers and don't limit engineering students to multiple choice buttons. To address usability and cognitive load, for instance, too many gestures can overwhelm learners, while simple buttons may not be engaging and effective enough. Explore fixed device or hands-free setups. For example, imagine a tablet fixed on a stand so that learners can use both hands for tangible interactions. Most important, integrate learning theory, because many apps are technology-driven, but not grounded in pedagogy. So linking interaction choices to constructivism or inquiry-based learning would make them definitely more effective. And finally, evaluate over the long term, because most studies measure short-term engagement, and we need to see how mobile augmented reality influences learning retention weeks or months later. These are directions for both researchers and practitioners. Of course, our review has limitations. We found very few long-term studies, almost no cross-cultural or accessibility analysis, and little systematic work on cognitive load. And these are areas where future work is probably needed. So to conclude, mobile augmented reality has great potential to support learning through interactive visualization and context-based experiences, but interaction design is not neutral. It must be carefully tailored to learners' age, abilities, and educational context. If we address inclusivity, usability, and long-term impact, mobile augmented reality experiences may move beyond the novelty effect and become a mature educational medium. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Spyros, for giving the time. There are questions there. Let's go to Fotis first.
Thank you, Spyros, for this interesting survey. I have two questions, remarks. If I got it correctly, you didn't use any voice interaction?
No.
Because it's very popular now with, apart from the phones, we're using now a lot of the glasses, which are, or the phones. So this is something that you might want to see. I think this is it's becoming very, very popular now. And the other question is about your remark. You said that when you register your position, your pose with markers, then if you lose sight, you're losing the. Are you sure that this is correct? Because slam now is used everywhere.
I know. The second one is kind of technical, but let me start with this one. Okay. From my personal experience as a developer, I know that if you lose contact with a marker and you use a fixed tool to develop market-based scanning, it uses only the accelerometer, so it's very inaccurate and it's not good for a good experience. But we have a solution, for example, which is very easy for everyone to make, that when you start with a market-based tracking and then you switch, you find the plane which is closer to the market and you switch to plane-based tracking. However, I tested very carefully the papers that we screened, and they had no such features besides one or two, which I classified to feature-based tracking rather than market-based tracking. So unfortunately, most of the educational papers, because we restricted our study to just educational papers, they did not have such, they don't seem to have such affordances. But yes, generally you can do it. And regarding your first question, I also agree that voice-based interaction and activation is, of course, very, very easy to do and use. But again, in the studies that we saw in our research, we didn't see much of this type of interface. So this is why I didn't include it here. But I do agree that at least maybe not in school, in a school environment, because if there are too many children talking concurrently, maybe this won't work that well. But generally, it might be a very good option for interaction. I totally agree.
I want to make a comment. First of all, I would like to really congratulate you for this. I really liked it. It was very thorough, very clearly set objective, and you, to my opinion, you study a really interesting and very often neglected area of technology from research community. And I will refer again to my personal conviction, and I made a reference in today's keynote on the same thing. Heidegger referred to many instruments as disappearing because they become so common and used in many everyday tasks that they're ready at hand, as he says in his work. And the example is, if I'm writing a love letter, the pen or the pencil I'm using is not there. It doesn't exist unless it breaks down and stops writing, because I'm focusing on the task of writing the letter. So many researchers say that mobile phones are Heideggerian ready at hand. They're an extension of our body. So they're everywhere, that we use them everywhere. And it's really great shame, and that's a comment, that if you look in this conference and many others in this field, most of our research effort is put on very sophisticated, very expensive equipment, which costs thousands of euros, and is no time in the foreseeable future going to end up in real schools, unless in elite schools. So in education, they have real no use. They're very good. They serve our curiosity. Probably are better, easier to get funding if you use expensive equipment, because you're convinced that it's something more advanced. But if we really, as a community, want to make an impact on real users in education and other sectors, we should focus more and more on these devices, which are very powerful with a lot of sensors. You know, there are about 50 sensors on this device. And we need to put effort to improve the situation, which, as you described, is not optimal. Perhaps this is because we don't put effort in improving interaction and using this as mobile augmented reality tools, which, to my understanding, they have a role to play, and it's very important. And I really encourage younger people who work in this field to look more carefully in this. Probably it doesn't sound as sexy, as buying a very expensive, I don't know, Oculus or other equipment, but probably will have much more impact in real life. Thank you, but congratulations for your work.
Thank you very much, Nikos. I wouldn't agree more, really, because you know, as a developer, I love developing for HoloLens, I love developing for Oculus and so on. But this is actually AR for the masses, okay? Because everybody has it, and we can deploy large experiments in cities like visitors of a city, of monuments, of cultural heritage spaces, in schools, and there's lots of work being done actually in augmented reality. But we haven't yet made a good analysis of what's possible there and what are the options and what are the interfaces that you can use. And so I tried also we tried as a team, we tried also to map all these different affordances that you can have with AI, different ways of interacting with the content, so that future developments, they also have a tool set to use all these options and maybe come to more creative solutions. So I totally agree. I would like also to ask fellow colleagues to give a second chance to mobile AR, just because it's there and we all have it. So it's good to deploy it on a larger scale.